Would you like an insider's look at behind the scenes with 10 of the greatest winemaking families of Europe? What does it take to run a successful family business, a winery, for 30 generations? And how are family wineries different from those that are owned by large corporations? Well, tonight you're going to get those stories and more with our guest, whom I'll introduce momentarily. Now, if you're watching this video on the replay, please get into the comments and type the word replay. Let me know where you're logging in from, what's in your glass. Of course, if you're here during the live stream, I want to hear from you as well. I'm Natalie McLean, and I teach online food and wine pairing classes, and you've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Tuesday at 7 p.m. to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. Now, this video is based on a recording that I made for my podcast, the Unreserved Wine Talk, but I will be here live in the comments, so get in there. Let me know, what questions do you still have? What tips and stories are you enjoying? I really want to hear from you. And before I introduce our guest, just let me say that 2 of you are going to win a copy of her terrific book, The 10 Great Wine Families, a tour through Europe. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know that you'd like to win a copy. I'll choose 2 people randomly from those who contact me. All right, back to our guest. Fiona Morrison is a master of wine, wine author, and merchant who lives in Bordeaux and Belgium. Educated in Britain, France, and the USA, her career has spanned many facets of the wine trade. She began working for Paterno Imports in Chicago before joining Seagram Chateau and Estates in New York. In 1992, she returned to Europe to become the international spokesperson for the Bordeaux Wine Bureau. She is married to Jacques Thiampont of Lapin fame and currently manages the Thiampont family negociant business. Winner of several awards for her writing, including the James Beard Foundation Award, her latest book, 10 Great Wine Families, was published internationally. She was awarded the title of Officer of the Order of Leopold, the most important military and civil order in the Kingdom of Belgium in 2019, for her services to the Belgian wine world. She joins us now from her home in Pomerol. Welcome, Fiona. It's so great to have you with us.
Natalie, it's fun to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. Our pleasure. All right. So you studied, while you were studying literature at the University of Exeter, you joined the wine tasting team. Tell us what happened.
Well, English universities tend to have this great tradition that they feel that part of your education should be to taste wine. And it still exists today.
Excellent.
So there was a wonderful wine tasting club, very male dominated. Luckily, I was admitted to it quite early, and we realized that there was a wine tasting competition going on between various universities in Britain. So we entered as an amateur team, and we beat all the local universities around us, and we went on to win what was called the Hepworth Trophy, which was pitted at Exeter against all the top universities.
Wow.
The prize was a trip to Bordeaux to do the harvest for 1 week. I say the second prize was probably the trip to go to Bordeaux to do the harvest for 2 weeks. Never having done a harvest before, it was pretty backbreaking, but riotous and fun and ebullient, and it was a great vintage, and it really made me want to get into the wine business after I'd graduated.
And did you work at a variety of estates, or was there one where you were?
Well, my father banned me. He said it's not, in those days, wine business is not a business for a woman to go into. I went to the Sorbonne in Paris and got a master's there first, and really polished up my French. And then I went to the States and got a business degree. And having done that, because it's quite difficult, even in those days, I said, right, now I can do whatever I like. And I had a great opportunity to go and work for 2 wonderful wine companies when I was in the States.
Yeah, you certainly have the credentials. Now, tell us how you met your husband, Jacques. Am I pronouncing this correctly? Thiampont?
It's in French, it's Thiampont. In Flanders, which is our part of Belgium, it's Tienpont. But if I say Thiampont in Belgium, they think I'm a complete and utter snob. And if I say Tienpont in France, no one understands. So I probably be one of the only people who married a man with two surnames. But I met him in Bordeaux. His cousin was a great friend of mine in Paris, and we studied doing Master of Wine together. And she was always talking to me about Jacques. And I said, well, I don't really need to be set up with anyone. What I really want to do is go and taste his incredible wine. So I met him at a dinner during the En Primeur week in Bordeaux, which is a very important week in the springtime when all the chateaux release for tasting the wine that they'd made the year before. And I was at a dinner tasting and sitting next to him. And he said, would you like to come and see Le Pin tomorrow? And the rest is history. So
wow.
It's great.
So you got more than just a tasting. You got a husband.
I got more than just a tasting. Yes, I got a husband as well. Yeah, and we've been married for over 25 years.
Oh, congratulations.
And we still work, really well together.
That's great. I guess they say wine is a better social lubricant than orange juice, so must help in some ways.
It certainly is. And I was terribly afraid that we would be just talking vino babble for the whole of our marriage. But I think that what happens is because it's a lowest common denominator, you don't take it for granted, but it's a great platform from which you have all sorts of other conversations.
Yes, that's true. And wine does lend itself to every other facet of human endeavor. So
exactly.
Absolutely. Now, Le Pin, it's one of the most renowned wines, but tell us what it's named after.
Well, it's actually Le Pain in French. Yes.
Okay.
So actually, pain sounds rather like Pain in French, which is bread. And all of our estates are called after trees. We have a great fascination for trees anyway, but Le Pin means a pine tree. And there was a pine tree on the estate, and the estate was called Chateau du Pin before Jacques bought it in 1979. It's a fairy tale story. He had heard from his uncle, who had our sister estate, Vieux Chateau Saint-Anne, that this wonderful 1 hectare of land was coming up for sale. And the family thought it was too expensive to buy to add to Vieux Chateau Saint-Anne. So Jacques, who wasn't married at the time, said, well, 1 hectare, it's a vegetable garden. I think I can manage that myself. He'd learnt how to make wine at VCC, at Vieux Chateau Saint-Anne. And he started off really very modestly with a barrel borrowed here, a tank borrowed there, and very artisanal winemaking. And that was in 79. And of course, all hell broke loose with the release of the 1982 vintage, which was tasted by top experts, having languished for first, including Parker, but a lot of people, and had languished for the first two vintages also on the shelves of negociants. And then when the famous 82 came out, which became one of Parker's first 100-point wines, everyone was rushing at the door, and Jacques wasn't quite sure what to do, what to do with anyone. But the rest is history, and Le Pin today has become a very sought-after wine. The fact that it is expensive and there's very little made kind of puts us on our toes during the harvest. We have slight butterflies in our stomachs because the expectations are so high. Sure. But we really enjoy making it, and we haven't grown that much. It's now about a 7-acre, 8-acre estate, but all the vineyards are contiguous. So the soil is the same throughout the vineyard. Okay. And of course, it's shock horror, 100% Merlot.
We'll get to that. So do you make about 5,000 bottles on average?
Yes.
Okay.
That's about it. I've just been tasting all day today the 23 lots and the 24 lots. We've done the blend for 23, but we just had 2 or 3 lots on the side that we wondered whether we could add to the wine to make a little bit more. But 1 we could, but 3 hours we couldn't. And for 24, which was a small harvest, I think we're looking at about 4,000 bottles, which is a bit sad, but that's what it is. Yeah.
That's what it is. And how would you characterize overall the 2023 and 2024 vintages for you?
Well, 23 was a warm vintage, but we've got used to it. And without going into too much detail, there's so much that we've done viticulture, along with everyone in the wine business, to combat the effects of climate change.
Sure.
And it's fascinating to see how everyone's coping with that. I think we're okay. I think we do not have to dig out the Merlot and plant Tempranillo. It's going to be okay. But it was a warm vintage, a late vintage for 23, slightly um, marked by the fact that the wine world was going into recession. So the wines actually were sold at an incredibly good price at about 20, 30, 40% discounts. So it's a great vintage in Bordeaux to pick up value-wise. And at 24, it rained a lot. We did have some mildew. The wines were born in a cool, wet vintage. But on the other side, on the positive side, the alcohols are lower. They're around 12 and a half, 13, whereas
Wow.
some vintages we have, 14 and a half, 15. So we like that, and they've got lovely silky textures. It's rather like going back to the 80s, going back to the old days. But I think the trend now is to go for more elegant, more appetizing wines. I think we're
Sure.
sliding away from the big sort of blockbuster wines. I don't know what your feeling is, but you
Absolutely.
as a sort of as a tasting and food and wine matching, I think that the more the cuisine that we are eating is more healthy, more vegetable based, more natural. So we need wines that have got that more silky elegance rather
Yes.
than the sort of rich blockbuster density to them. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I
The
think it
fruit
will be
bombs
good.
just overwhelm food. But you've alluded to the price. People will be curious. In a good vintage, on average these days, how much does a bottle of your wine sell for?
Well, we release it to the trade, but of course, rather like in a lot of markets, including Canada, including the US, there are tiers. So
Yes.
if we release a wine at about 1,500 euros and dollars being more or less the same, that wine probably will get to the consumer at about 2,500
Euros.
euros.
In
Yes,
Canadian dollars, that's
300.
probably $3,500 or something. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
or
It's a lot of money, and especially when we're starting out, we used to drink the wine with a pipette out of barrels
oh, the
because we
long
used to.
hose stick
Yeah,
to take
but
samples.
you
Yes.
takes out samples because we said that once it's bottled, it's beyond our means.
So you can't afford to drink your own wine.
Can't afford to drink our own wine. We drink it with our friends and our collectors who are clients.
Yeah, invite us over to have our wine, please. Cobbler's kids. And what's the most anyone has ever paid for a bottle of your wine?
Well, we do make very rarely double magnums that we use only for charity purposes.
Okay.
Because if you make bigger than a magnum, there's so much speculation around it, and we want our wines to be drunk, not to be traded. So
Sure.
that's really important.
Sure.
And so I would say about 6 months ago for a big charity, somebody paid £50,000
Wow.
in London for a double magnum.
Huh, one
But it
bottle
was a
wine.
good cause. It was a good
Yes,
cause. Yeah,
sure.
yeah. And there's
Absolutely.
still a lot of money in the world.
Yes, yes.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
especially for rarities.
mm.
Um, so you've mentioned Merlot. Of course, the movie Sideways back in the early 2000s did some damage. But it's actually a remarkable grape. Um, why do you characterize it as a showgirl or how do you tame it?
Those are two really good questions. Well, first of all, the first time I went to Napa after Sideways came out, and people said, "Well, what's your blend?" And I said, "Well, Merlot." And they said, "Merlot and what?" And they said, I said, 100% Merlot, and they would give me this very pitying look, like, you know, oh gosh, you poor things. And I would say, well, actually, we do okay. Um, Merlot is quite like um, a showgirl, and I remember going to Tokyo, giving the first big wine tasting in Tokyo in the early 90s, and I had no one understanding what the difference between Cabernet and Merlot was. And I described Merlot rather like Sharon Stone and being quite pompous and beautiful and round and voluptuous. all of these, please excuse me, dear listeners. I know we're in these very woke times. This is absolutely not appropriate, but 25 years ago it was. And it is a grape that can be very fleshy. It doesn't like really hot weather. It likes to keep its feet wet, so it needs moisture. It can, in those cases, if you shade the fruit a bit and let the grapes ripen, but under sort of parasol, just as if somebody was saving their complexion.
The leafy canopy is what you're referring to, right?
Exactly.
So you're not
exactly.
cropping back the leaves
So,
so much.
no, so you've got this lovely parasol effect, this dappled light effect.
That's nice.
And you keep the area around the vine, especially the vine roots, and we're doing a lot of work with fungi at the moment to do that, exactly that. Then you can get a lovely balance and you can get some elegance. But if you crop very strongly and you take off the leaves, the wine can get quite vulgar quite quickly. And when I mean vulgar, it can get really rich, very sugary,
Jammy.
because there's, of course, much more jammy. There's much more sugar and alcohol in Merlot than there is in Cabernet, which may surprise some people, but Cabernet has less alcohol than Merlot, which is a big, ripe, juicy grape. So when we tame Merlot, I've described what we do in the vineyard, and in the cellar, we really do very little pumping over. We sort of use infusions rather than actually doing pumping over and soaking the grapes to get the maceration.
What are infusions?
Infusions is sort of like when you've got your tea bag in your tea. You're just letting, you have to wet the cap so that it doesn't get dry and tannic, but you're just doing that. You're not doing great sort of pumping over,
down that cap,
punching down or anything like that.
Okay.
You're just letting things actually sort of stew over quite nicely, but without any violence or any over exaggeration. And it seems to work.
Yeah, so far so good,
Yes.
I'd say. So, Timpong is one of the 10 families you write about in the book. What was the most difficult part of actually writing about a family of which you are a part?
Well, for one thing, it's a very big family. Jacques has, I think, over 35 different cousins. It's a big Catholic family, and in those days there was not much television around, so there are a lot of children. And I think being very close to everybody, I had to be careful not to offend people by really telling some stories about the family, of course, but really sort of giving the inside look into our family and taking a step out and looking at Jacques and I and what we've achieved or what we haven't achieved, and describing things like the nervousness that you feel just before you're picking the grapes, or the slight bashfulness that we have when people about the price of our wines, but also the absolute love of being able to do a métier, a career, that in 9 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning you can be out pruning the vines in your Wellington boots and your jeans and gloves, and in that evening you could be in Paris in the Tour Eiffel, serving your wines at a great banquet in evening attire. And I think we love that sort of duality. It's so much fun, all different sides of the business. And I think I try and give that impression, and the fact that we are farmers, but we also have a lovely lifestyle as well. And it's lovely to see people get so excited when they taste our wines.
That's great. Now, Timpong has 120 shareholders in the winery.
Not in Le Pin. Not in Le Pin.
Not in Le Pin.
No, that's for Vieux Château Seton, which
see.
is the estate that we have in Pomerol, which Jacques and I christened VCC because we thought that Vieux Château Seton was too long. It's become a really great wine and much appreciated around the world, although it was born mainly in Belgium because the wines were shipped up in barrels to our family home in Belgium, near Ghent. Okay. And for the first 50 years of its life, it was pretty much bottled in Belgium. We've just this year 2024 celebrated the 100-year anniversary
Oh, wow.
of the Chiampon family owning Vieux Chateau Seton, which has been quite a milestone for
Congratulations,
us.
yes. Well, there must be many shareholders still, even of Tiempon
Mm.
and the others. How do you resolve conflicts among so many different people who are involved? Like they're not maybe in the winery helping make the wine, but
They're
they
all
have a stake.
shareholders.
Yeah, exactly.
Funny enough, I mean, as you know, Natalie, a lot of the book is about how you resolve conflicts and how you prepare the next generation for to take over. And in fact, having lots of shareholders is actually easier than having just one or two heirs,
Really?
because the pressure when you've only got one or two heirs and do those children actually want to take over in the wine business? It's not a given. And the
Right.
worst thing you can do is, and this has happened, with our family, but we're very, very cautious about our two sons going into the business, and we haven't pushed them at all. But of course, they've grown up around wine, and they've grown up to being with us with wine. But it's absolutely their prerogative whether they want to do it. Whereas if you've got 120 shareholders, there's chances are there's at least a few that are actually interested in wine and will go into it. But
Right.
if you've got not many children, it's actually much harder. And in fact, I think that more estates have been lost out of the family because of people not wanting, the next generation not wanting to take over, than actually having conflicts with people fighting for position. But a very interesting point on that, Lamberto Frescobaldi, who comes from a large family and is 30th generation of his family, has instituted a very strict qualifying process for anyone who wants to come into the business. They have to be wine lovers. They have to be university educated. They have to have some business experience. They have to have some wine experience. So you can't just be to the manor born.
Right.
You really do need to have paid your dues before you get into this business. It's not a frivolous business. It's probably one of the most complicated businesses, and it's very easy to lose money, uh, and it's quite difficult to make money.
Well, as anybody who's watched the show Succession shows,
Mm.
like Nepo baby is not the way to go. I mean, you really do
Yeah,
have to put
exactly.
the relatives through their hoops if you really want to choose good leadership at the top. Um, so perhaps there are no books like this, but can you tell us what makes this book different from, say, other books about European wineries or families, if they exist?
I think Hugh Johnson put it very well in the foreword to the book. He said that I had got to the place where no other wine writers can get, which is actually to the heart of these winemakers.
Wow.
I had to make sure that they trusted me,
Yes.
that they were going to open up to me, that I was going to take care of their stories, that when there were secrets, that they could tell me as just as a way of giving me more information, but I could keep their secrets. But also, I insisted on staying with the families.
Ah, so you didn't
Uh,
just do
I,
some
I,
Zoom calls, you actually
no,
dug deeper.
I usually spent 2 or 3 days with them,
Ah,
and sometimes it meant sort of sipping cognac till 2 o'clock in the morning, or getting up early to go for a walk in the vineyards when there was still dew on the ground. But those are the conversations that you have that are really wonderful. And as you say, most of us, including me, gets to see people for a sort of just a snapshot, shot of their lives, and I really wanted to get under the skin and meet other members, meet the kids, meet the parents, sometimes be witness to some pretty heated moments. One family, it was Dirk Meerport's family in Portugal, in Oporto, were having a real humdinger about succession with legal papers going backwards and forwards while I was there,
wow.
and me being sort of carted off to meet the parents and various family members. And so I was really at the eye of the storm for that. And what was absolutely wonderful was on Christmas Day that year, so a couple of months after I'd been visiting the property, both in Douro and in Porto, I got a text message on Christmas Day saying, "Happy Christmas, Fiona. My sister signed the papers. Hallelujah."
This is from
It's
Dirk
done.
people?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's done. Yeah.
How did they
So that
resolve that? Like, did they just vote, or how do they resolve big conflicts like that,
I I
especially when a
I
younger
I,
generation wants to
I
do
think if
something
there's
different?
anyone out there who knows about family conflict,
Yes.
it takes a lot of discussion. It takes quite a lot of compromise.
Yeah.
And of course, it does take compromise.
Right.
It's certain, but it's trying to make a win-win situation and trying to sort of balance needs. But also, as I said with Frescobaldi, excuse me, you do need to be hard-nosed about finding the right person for the job.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense.
Sorry, yeah,
Oh no.
and you can't be romantic about that. It
Sure.
often doesn't work.
Sure. Sure. Feel free to take a drink of water if you need to.
I've actually only got a glass of wine
Oh,
with me.
there. Well, that's even better. Good for you. That'll stay the
Yeah,
cough.
it's evening with me, so I'm not.
Yes.
Listeners, please do not think that I'm indulging at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Well, you'd have the professional cover if you were, so I don't think you need to
I would
worry.
probably I'll probably have a spittoon with me too.
Speaking of that, I just you've mentioned this in another conversation, but why did the book Stay With Me Flagons by Maurice Healy give you some inspiration either for this book or for your other
You're
writing?
referring to a wonderful old book that was written at the beginning of the 20th century. And
Yes.
I think those books were written by gentlemen wine lovers, gentlemen merchants, who were genuinely passionate about wine, who did not have the technical terms to describe wine as we do. They would not talk about acidity or tannin or balance or residual sugar. They would just talk about wines, how they affected you personally, sensually. And I think we're getting back to that way because I think there's nothing more boring than reading loads of rather dry tasting notes. And I loved that book because it was just generally joyful about what wine can do to us, and whether it's a mood changer or it just makes you think of a book or a piece of music. And in those days, it was much more hedonistic and much more culturally open than it is today, where sometimes we can be a little bit too scientific.
Yes.
And I think it's so important to capture the magic and build bridges between experiences and the wine and tell stories,
Yes.
which brings wine alive much more. More and more that I know about wine, the more I try and put behind me the science, unless we're doing technical tastings, and really talk about what effect a wine has, on. So
I think that's what people resonate with, the emotion and the storytelling. It's just that's how to bring a lot of subjects alive, but especially wine when words are so difficult to capture that subjective experience, except you can allude then to how it makes you feel. So I love how you do that.
thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So the old adage about family businesses is that the first generation creates it, the second wastes it, and the third loses it. Harvard University stats back this up. 88% of family businesses don't survive to the third generation. The families you profile run from the fourth generation to the 30th, in the case of Frescobaldi. Were there any sort of specific ingredients that held these families together? Why they were successful when many other family businesses fail?
I think the good side of wine business is the pride and the feeling that you are going to be passing it on to a next generation. Unlike corporations who get into the wine business where they're looking for short-time profit and they often have shareholders to answer to,
Yes.
most of the decisions that family companies make, and this resonated everywhere I went, are for the long term. So if you replant a vineyard, you're looking at it for sort of 20 years' time because vines are like children. They really become interesting when they're teenagers and at their absolute prime in sort of 30, 40, 50, and then perhaps they get a little bit weaker later. But if you take care of them, old vines are wonderful. And so that continuity and that feeling of long-term, uh, long-termism is really for me the key ingredient, and not having to satisfy a balance sheet. Of course, that's important, and there are some pretty difficult situations where families have to say, look, we're not going to be paying out a dividend this year, or we're not going to be able to afford a new tractor. Well, if you do that in a family context, people understand. They've got a much longer time frame where they can judge that. If you do that in a shorter term, or if you get into the wine business just to make money, it can be pretty precarious. You know, Natalie, the adage, to make a great fortune in the wine business, you have to start with an even larger one.
Yes.
And yes, you can make money. Yes, you can create perenniety. In the real estate business, everyone talks about location, location, location. But the key for the wine is to buy the best terroir, the best vineyard land you can afford to make a wine. And almost everyone that I interviewed, even though some big companies such as Torres, what they're looking for is site-specific origins, good land that can be farmed, that can be maybe enriched or improved. But those elements, which are very peasant-like in a way, I mean, that side of the business is really important. It's the key to continuity and perenniety, I believe.
Yes, absolutely. Were there any, in choosing these 10 families, you knew some of them, of course, were there any other factors, cultural, economic, political, that influenced which ones you decided to include in the book?
Well, I'll tell you a little story. When a publisher approached me, it was actually a Belgian publisher first, and the book was first published in the Flemish language, in the Dutch language. He said, they said, we want you to do a book of the 10 greatest wines of the world. And I said, great. And I looked into buying a round the world ticket, and so I presented them with a budget.
Oh.
And they sort of took a gulp and said, maybe you should start with Europe. Which actually made it very much easier for me, because my day job is actually wine and not so much writing. I think the family got a little fed up when I would sort of after supper I would go and retire and write a few chapters of a book or write a few pages of a book. It's squeezed in between lots of other activities. So of course Europe became that factor. I wanted to make sure that I had a good covering in Europe, and I also wanted to make sure that I had families that people knew about. This was not a book about see the new small producer that I've discovered.
Right.
It was really the operating one was families. The dynamic for me about how you adapt and how you create generations was for me the sort of driving force of the book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Far more interesting too. They've kind of proved themselves through a multi-generational business. So let's get back to Frescobaldi. This is a fascinating story. 30 generations. You spoke to Lamberto Frescobaldi, but let's go back in time. How did the family? It was a banking family, if I understand correctly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How'd they know? Go ahead.
Well, I have to stop because it's very quick. Yes. Wine only became their key source of income in the 20th century. They were bankers, really. They actually, the florin, which was made by them, was created by them.
The coin?
Created the coin, the florin coin. Oh. They were like the Medicis, who of course they fought tooth and nail with. They were hugely influential, and they were great patrons of the arts. So they had a lot of money and beautiful estates, which made wine. But of course, in those very aristocratic days, the only trade that you could really do was something like banking. It was very not seen to be working on land. That was for peasants. But one of the key things for them, which was critical and caused them international approbation, but also quite a lot of admiration as well, was they lent a lot of money to Henry VIII, King of England,
Oh,
who most of you will know because he cut off the heads of at least two of his wives and divorced two. But
right.
he broke with the Catholic Church when, after his marriage to his first Spanish wife,
This
when he
Catherine of
wanted to,
Aragon?
Catherine of Aragon, when he
Yeah.
wanted to marry Anne Boleyn.
Uh,
And so he was excommunicated from the church.
mm-hmm.
And the Frescobaldi's were almost excommunicated from the church because they lent Henry VIII the money to actually pay off Catherine of Aragon and actually extricate themselves from the Catholic Church, which was
Wow.
hugely important. And
Created a schism.
the it created a huge schism, and actually so created the whole history of Great Britain, because Great
Yes.
Britain became Protestant after that.
Yes.
And one of the greatest things that happened was that I was led by the historian of a family, who was actually a family member, to a castle out in the countryside, up to this turret in the castle. I had to put on a mask and white gloves and went into this room, and she opened this sliding drawer and took out this parchment that had a seal the size of a dinner plate.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
a great seal of Henry VIII, and it was the original agreement document. And I must say, I love history, but
Yes.
that was a pretty amazing moment.
Amazing. That's
Yeah,
fantastic. Wow.
yeah.
They had connections. They also knew the famous poet Dante Alighieri.
As I said, they were patrons of the arts, so
Right.
they actually gave quite a bit of money to Dante. They actually also Michelangelo did the dome of their local church, the Church of Santa Spirito. They also had a family musician called Frescobaldi, who was a very famous Renaissance composer, very well known. And I mean, you have to read the book, but there's some really good stories about some of the people that they aided and helped. But Florence at that time was so important, and it was so much a capital of a Renaissance, and they
Right.
were very much at the heart of
At
that.
the heart of it. They even knew Galileo.
Absolutely, but can you imagine? I mean, can you imagine sort of walking through the Santa Spirito, and sort of seeing the Frescobaldi palaces, and they built the bridge across the Arno, first bridge across the Arno, so that you could get to the left bank of the city. It's they
Wow.
were incredible.
Fundamental. Wow.
Mm.
So, okay, and then we'll stay in Italy with Gaia, Angelo Gaia, whom I've met, but describe him. He is a ball of energy. How
I
would you
am on.
describe?
Yeah, he really is. I call him Maestro.
Okay.
And we're both part of an organization of winemakers together. So I see him once or twice a year, and I absolutely adore him. He's strict. He's quite frightening. He's very, very intense in his ideas, and he came from very peasant stock. I mean, Piedmont between during the battles of independence of Italy, Piedmont was very, very poor. And it was his grandfather, who really got the ball rolling and started bottling his own wines. And the search for excellence and for quality, Angelo was very much the pioneer. His mother was a great character as well, and really took over a lot of the estate before Angelo came into the business. But they are uncompromising. He is uncompromising as a person, full of warmth, a bear of a man, but he's got these days he wears his bright red glasses, but he's got a huge smile and a huge hug, and he's wonderful. And I adore Gaia, who I've spent a lot of time in the vineyards, and Rosanna and Giovanni. I'm very close to the family, and Rosa, his wife, and he still run the business, although the children have more or less taken over. He says he's stepping back, but I see him there every day when I'm there. And he's a big man in many, many ways, but he's very courageous, They started with nothing. If you like, sorry, San Lorenzo is like Le Pin is for us. It's the birthplace of their style of Barbaresco, which also rather like Le Pen. People think that their Barbarescos are very rich and quite tannic, and in fact they are most beautiful, elegant, violet tinted wines which drink so well, especially after about 30 years of age. And I think actually if I was trying to put a thread through the book, the wines that I love and which reverberate with me are those sort of wines. And so maybe I chose people also because I had to really want to go and taste their wines. And so in the book, it's probably subjective because it is my style of wines that I like.
And why did he call his daughter Gaia Gaia? First
Because
name and last name.
Because he had two daughters to begin with,
Okay.
and he said, and his family there's not a woman in his family. He said, "What if I only have daughters? What's going to happen to the Gaia name?" And so that's why he called Gaia Gaia. But I
So
think
that
I
he's
love
still
what I
a Gaia.
do is I love the name Gaia because of course it's got so much resonance with the earth,
It means earth
and
goddess?
it's earth goddess, and it's also there are a lot of organizations now, organic organizations, and others which are called Gaia and bring this idea, and Gaia herself is really so knitted to the soil, and discussions that I have with her are very earth based, and we discuss ideas, we exchange research ideas, and she's just brilliant. She's great. Yeah.
And is it true he charges £300, $400 for a tasting at the winery?
Yes, but very important. They don't make much wine. They don't have huge cellar door. They don't have hostesses like most of these places that show people around and then give you a tasting and a judge. If you want to go and taste at Gaia, you need to make a contribution, a charity contribution of 300 euros to their charity, to their various charities they support. Piedmont is still quite a poor region, and so they want to give back to the community and to the area what they can. And of course, people who drink Gaia wines, they're expensive as well, can afford to give a charity donation. So I think it may seem a little harsh if you're a student and you want to go and taste the wines, but they are so rare, and it's a way of getting people to think about going on a visit there and giving something back to the community. So I actually think it's quite unusual, but I think it's a good solution for them.
Absolutely. Certainly would winnow out all the bachelorette parties. So
Exactly.
then again, they might all contribute. But anyway,
Yeah.
Leger Belair, Burgundy's renowned winery family. Why is theirs often known as the greatest vineyard in the world? What is it, and why is it so great?
Well, I mean, it's such an interesting story, the Leger Belairs. They live in the Chateau de Vosne-Romanée. So Vosne-Romanée, as most of you probably know, is the most famous village of the Côte d'Or,
That's where
and
Domaine Romani-Conti is.
and it's where Dominion Conti is. But of course, there are other vineyards there, including a very special vineyard called La Romanée, and it belonged to the family. The family were ennobled by, like a lot of other people, by Napoleon. They were a military family, but they had roots in Burgundy, and they had this vineyard, which passed unfortunately out of the family until many years. And Louis Michel de Gibelaire, who was they still had the castle, the wonderful home that they have, the chateau they have, but he really single-handedly has managed to reunite the estate again. He's quite controversial because he's bigger than life. He's got very strong ideas of things. people think he's quite sort of pompous and snobby and things like that, but I think it's shyness because there's a side that I know of him which is unbelievably thoughtful and kind and questioning, but a lot of people don't see that side. He's really worked hard. The wines are absolutely breathtaking, and I'll let you into a little secret. I think actually he makes La Romney is probably the best wine in Burgundy at
Even
the
better
moment.
than DRC.
Aubert, forgive me.
He's not listening.
But I think, but I mean, I love
Wow.
DOC, but I just love the purity of this wine and the way he makes it, and his absolute individualism as a person, and the way he makes wines, and the way he sells wines. He's very controversial, but
What's the most controversial thing he said, or an example?
well, it's just his attitude because he can be quite dismissive of people. He doesn't take any prisoners, and he is so unerringly honest, and so sometimes that comes across with himself, but
Blunt.
with
Yeah.
but with us. I mean, sometimes if I ask a stupid question, I get my
You get cuffed.
fingers wrapped. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, don't be so stupid. But he, I adore him and his wife, and I've had many evenings talking wine to late into the evening, and I love his family, and I think it's really somebody who came into the business having had come from a military family and really worked hard to reclaim their Burgundian heritage. And it's a very unique story. It's great. The wines are very difficult to get hold of these days. They have a great little wine bar in the centre of Vosne Romani. If anyone is passing through, it's really worth going by. And I think he's just so individual and brave. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Perrin. We'll just skip hopscotch across the remaining ones. But was there something surprising about the Perrin family in the Rhone Valley of
Oh,
France?
yeah. I mean, everyone knows Perrin because of Beaucastel. It's really a famous estate. And they're
Yes.
building a new winery now, which is so far ahead of its time.
Oh,
It's Adobe style. So
okay.
it's really using thermo-energy and a method called pisé with earth and straw to insulate, and it's very carbon neutral, and it's going to be a blueprint for wineries in the future. It's very important.
Fascinating. Yeah.
But what I loved there is there are, I think it's, I should have looked it up, I think 7 or 8 children from the two brothers, Francois and Jean-Pierre. Every single one of them has a job in the winery.
Oh,
And it's rather like going into a Goldilocks house because they share an office, all of them.
okay.
There are 7 desks all around, and one handles this, and one handles that, and one handles this market. And can you imagine the force of will, but also the way that the family sticks together? And
That's a
I've been with them as a family. It's not just for show because I've seen them with their masks off, and this solidarity between so many children working together, laughing together, tasting together. I just think that it's amazing. When I walked into that office and saw all their desks and everyone the same and no jealousy, and I thought that was a blueprint of how to run a family business.
that's a lot
Of
of
course,
emotional discipline.
yeah, of course, and actually Jean-Pierre and Francois are quite old-fashioned in their discipline, but they're strict with themselves as well as their children. And of course, there's quite a bit of bling bling because, of course, they run the vineyard for Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, which is coming
Ah,
apart.
the Miraval.
And
Miraval,
the
right? That
Miraval,
makes. Does it
it's
make
made.
just rosé, or did they?
They have a bit of white, but of course, it's known for
It's
their
the rosé.
for the
Yeah.
rosé. And they've got into some really good opportunities. But what I love about the family is there are poor areas of the hillsides, because it's again, Verona is quite a poor area, like Gigondas, like Vinsobre, um, but Carignan, areas which were small villages, resto, that have come into their own because they've bought vineyards or estates and they're making wines there. And I think that's lovely because they've sprinkled a bit of stardust. If you go to Gigondas, there's a beautiful little hotel there, a good restaurant, but there's all been their initiative. So they are very anchored in their own, but they have also found ways to make life better for others, for their growers as well. And at the same time, keeping this great family solidarity going through the next generation. It's great.
That's fantastic. Wow. Have to mention Alvaro Palacios
Oh,
in Spain. He's
yeah.
such a charming man. Everyone wants to be his girlfriend, I think, that I've heard talk about him.
Although, of course, what is lovely about Alvaro and Christina is he married his school sweetheart,
High school. Oh, wow.
high school sweetheart,
And they're still
and they
together.
are inseparable, and they're wonderful. Christina is just gorgeous,
Nice.
and but what I love about Alvaro, I remember him sort of sitting down with his guitar and playing flamenco music and singing for me. It's pretty intensive. It sort of gets you in the heart.
Wow.
But I've also been with him when he's been so serious and dedicated and tough with himself. And he's one of the most precise tasters I've ever met. And what I like about him is the dichotomy of it, of his character. We can be having fun, we can be dancing, and I mean, he loves bullfights and standing on the table. And I've never laughed so much in my life as with him. But he's got this very serious, very tough side to his character. He's very tough with himself. And he's uncompromising with the quality of his wines. And I think he's the best winemaker in Spain at the moment. And what I also love is that he works a lot with Grenache.
Right. He's a big
Which
advocate versus the
Yeah,
flagship grape,
but
Tempranillo of the country. Yeah.
absolutely. But I think he's proved that Grenache is really the climate change grape.
Wow. Okay. So
and
it's
it's
heat
and it's
resistant.
resisting. It's resisting well, and it's showing complexities. We used to be a bit veggie, a little bit herbaceous,
Ah,
and now it's showing signs of depth of fruit and tannins, which can be quite silky and soft in the right hands. And I think he's pretty much been the savior for Grenache or Grenache. Incidentally, so is Perrin in Southern Rhone. It's
big advocate for
it,
Grenache.
yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Wow. Okay. Well, let's do some generalities here a little bit. When it comes to marketing and branding, how do you see these traditional families differentiating themselves in a world of celebrity winemakers and new labels and critter brands and all the rest of it? I mean, I know it's authenticity, story, roots, etc. But is there an example of one of these families that you've seen do something really interesting in the way they market their brands, their wines?
I think simplicity is really important. Simplicity, being true to their roots.
Yes.
So even though and the labels have got much cleaner and sober and are much more sober these days than they were in the past.
Right.
I would like to take a little time to take a little story for Torres, who were known
Yes.
for Sangre de
Yes,
Toro,
please.
the little black bull on the, but obviously, of course, Mas La Plana, the Cabernet. But one of the things that they did, which has completely changed their outlook, and they have done huge amounts on climate change and carbon neutrality and regeneration. In fact, they are, once again this year, the most admired wine brand. I think it's very important to show that you're paying your dues and you're doing research. But what I loved about Torres is they've gone into the mountains, into the villages, and resurrected old native grape varieties. But no one ever knew what they were. They were forgotten varieties. And
Okay.
they've created a group of wines called the ancestral wines, of which anyone comes across a wine called Forcada, a white wine. It's the name that they gave to a variety that they found. And it was painstaking. It took years to isolate these varieties to make sure that they were virus free, which is very difficult to do, and to find and to be able to propagate these varieties so that you could replant them and give a heritage to grapes that have been forgotten. And I think that for a company that's sort of known for, in many ways, for supermarket wines, is a lovely twist to a brand that could be commercial, but shows how much they are rooted in their heritage and their history. And I think all of the wines actually that I chose for the book were rooted in a history, and it comes back a bit, Natalie, to storytelling. It's really important as a brand to be honest, to tell your story, to not be tempted to buy trends, accept trends that will help us make healthier, not necessarily biodynamic or bio wines, but they help wines that are sustainable, regenerative, and show the diversity of the land around them. And brands that do that, and I would have loved to written about other brands around the world. I mean, I think what the Jackson family wines are doing around the world
In
is
California,
California, but everywhere. They're
Jackson.
everywhere. They're in Australia,
Yes.
they're in New Zealand, they're in Italy, they're in Spain.
True.
Bordeaux, I think is extraordinary. So family brands that are rooted, that root themselves in a sense of place, to me, that is what the consumer, the wine consumer today, really responds to.
Right. Absolutely. We're all looking for the story behind the bottle. I mean, it's not just, those of us who care about what we buy, just like
Exactly.
fair trade and sustainability and ethical practices and everything
It's a rolling
else.
stone. It's a rolling stone, and it's lovely to see how it's taking on, and how you do not have to be a huge brand to be able to embrace that movement.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, the strongest brands often start off so small, but are so tight, close knit with their story that's what resonates and makes them into a global phenomenon. People
and look
pick
at the
up on
success
that.
of Burgundy. Look at the success of Burgundy today. That's
Yes.
exactly what that's about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all of these families produce luxury wines. How do they view the concept of luxury in wine? Do they see their wines as luxury goods, or something else entirely?
I think we're all a little bashful at times, because we're making the wines that the best we can, and it's a market that has just taken those wines and
Sure.
and run with them.
Yeah.
It's quite a difficult question because, of course, in that world, they'd be accessible to everybody, but luxury is usually something that is imposed on a product when it goes to market because of its rarity. And when you look at something like Dom Perignon, everyone thinks of that as a luxury brand. What the absolute genius of Moet Hennessy has been is that brand is actually quite a large, several million bottles are made, and yet it still has that luxury image. So again, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I think it comes down to being true to your origins and making the best wine you can. And whether it's an Hermes bag, which has been stitched by hand and takes 3 weeks to make, or a bottle of Domaine de Romanée-Conti, it's the handiwork. But to me, is my idea of luxury. I don't think any of us wine people would like our idea of luxury to be bling bling.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
it's something more rooted into the soil, into the sense of play. And thank God, because that gives us our anchor.
Yes. Are there any, in all your travels and visits, is there a particular tasting that stands out? Maybe it was an old bottle, rare bottle, or maybe it wasn't. but a particular tasting that you remember from all your
Funny
research.
enough, and it might surprise you, like a lot of MWs, I absolutely adore Riesling as a grape. I
Mm-hmm.
adore Riesling. It's quite low alcohol, which is good in these times, but it so beautifully reflects like a crystal glass the many facets of a great wine. And Egon Muller
In Germany,
makes
yes.
in Germany in the Moselle
Mm-hmm.
makes to me the absolute top Riesling in the world. It is like nothing else made. It just it's so balanced and so pure. And he and I were born in the same vintage, which is a very good vintage. And one day he came to visit me in Bordeaux with his friends at Trimbacks, who are great friends of his and mine. And he bought me a bottle of TBA, Chocolate and Bernhaus Laser 59, which is a such a mystical wine. And I'd never thought I'd taste that wine in my life. And we'd had a very big day tasting, and we had dinner at our house, big fire burning and things like that. And at the end of the evening, he went to the car and he brought out this bottle. And I think we all burst into tears because it was
Really?
just so perfect and so beautiful, and it was just the right occasion to have it. And
Wow.
it was crystal clear and pure, and had so much flavour to it. And a TBA, of course, is very sweet, but of course it didn't taste sweet because it had this lovely richness and dry extract to it, and it was youthful still and just gorgeous and nectar of the gods. It was, of course, I've been lucky to taste a lot of, the sort of wines that people talk about, but I think that was probably the most surprising and the most beautiful surprise I've ever had.
Wonderful. Moved you to
Yeah.
tears. Holy smokes. This is marvelous. Well, time has flown, so let's just get to some of the wrap up questions. Can you tell us about a favorite childhood food and what you'd pair today with it as an adult?
I grew up in Scotland,
Ah, there we
so
go.
smoked salmon was
Oh,
always something that we had, and sea urchins from the walls of the cliffs, and a lot of seafood, and we used to drink that with just really good salsa, and wasn't it wasn't the sense that it was great wine, but it was the first incredible food and wine matching.
huh.
And I think we started drinking wine when we were about sort of 12, 14 years old.
What an early childhood.
I did have my father, I think when I turned 18, brought out a bottle of Chateau Lerve-Lescas, which is already one of my complete wines. Everyone knows about it, and especially for making wines on the right bank, people
Beautiful
always
Bordeaux. Yeah.
bringing me Lescas. So
Wow.
having very, very old Lescas, again from the 50s, and
Yeah.
just being totally knocked out that a wine could have so much flavor and freshness still.
Wow.
So
Lovely.
yeah.
And if you could share a bottle of wine with anyone outside of the wine world, living or dead, who would that be and what bottle would you open?
I think what I would love to do, I think the person I admire most is Shakespeare.
Ah.
I was an English literature graduate. I did a degree in comparative literature at the Sorbonne. Shakespeare's been with me all my life, really, and I love his sonnets and I love his plays, and I'm a really avid theatre goer. And I think I would share a very, very old Madeira with him. Sort of sounds sort of Tudorish enough.
Yes.
By the fire, and probably want to recite poetry to him or with him or whatever. But I think how modern he was and how absolutely alive his plays are still, and
True.
how
They
much
still.
they do. And so, yeah, I mean, people talk about the Dalai Lama and people like that, but I would say the person who's really stuck with me most of my life is Shakespeare.
His literature lived just as some wines do, at least
Yeah,
even in our
exactly.
memories.
Mm, mm.
This is wonderful, Fiona. As we wrap up our conversation, is there anything you wanted to mention that we haven't touched on?
I think what I would really love to say is for everyone out there who loves wine, find out about the stories and tell the stories. They're so interesting. If you can go and see the producers, go and see them. As long as you write to them a long time ahead, a lot of people have opened their doors. The next generation is so important. We talk at the moment that young people are not so drinking so much wine, but read. I got into wine by reading and tasting. It's such a magic world. Don't be intimidated by it.
Mm-hmm.
Go and visit vineyards. Go and taste wines, and it will be a companion for great meals, but also great conversations and great travel for the rest of your life.
Wise words. Where can we find you and your books online?
Well, the Academy du Vin Library is the great source, and actually my book is available on that notorious online bookstore.
That begins with
A. But you can find me in Pomerol. I'm on Instagram, Fiona Morrison,
Okay.
very Scottish name.
Yes.
You can also find me through VMWs and things like that, or through the domain Jacques Tiampon. I'm around. I travel quite a lot. I've got lots of friends in the wine business, and I'm often in Bordeaux. So I'm on the right bank of Bordeaux.
Okay, well, we'll look for you there.
Okay.
This is great, Fiona. Don't sign off yet, but I'm going to say goodbye for now, and I hope we can do this over a glass of wine. Maybe not yours, but somebody's.
Anyone's. Actually, I had a lovely visit to Canada last year.
Great.
In the Okanagan Valley.
Oh, beautiful region. Yes.
So thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation, Natalie.
Okay.
Thanks,
Fiona. Okay.
Bye.
Bye for now.